Topic 2, favorite game. Final Fantasy VI. I've said this many times. It was Final Fantasy III. Originally, when I played it on the Super Nintendo, I was a huge fan of Final Fantasy II. And the original Final Fantasy on Nintendo, I don't think I actually played until later in life. I don't think I had it growing up. I don't recall. I have it now. I know I have the NES cartridge now. I just saw it the other day when I was going through old boxes and stuff. But Final Fantasy II was certainly the Final Fantasy that lasted, that made the most lasting effect on my mind as a first Final Fantasy game. And Final Fantasy III, or 6, cemented my love of the series. Got a whole bunch of reasons for why. So, kind of going through point by point. Story. I didn't realize when I was 10 or however old I was when that game came out how big a story can be told in video games. And that is the story of Final Fantasy VI brings these... It's effectively Star Wars, basically, because you've got the Rebel Alliance and the Returners, and you've got the Empire in the Empire. And the Empires, they've got Vector as their capital city, much like Coruscant, basically trying to take over the world. And you've got the Emperor Gestalt, is kind of the head, just like Emperor Palpatine. And then you've got Kefka, who is kind of turns out a little bit more puppet mastery, kind of pulling the strings behind it. And so he's not a direct correlation to Vader, but he's certainly one of the most iconic characters of the game, just like Vader is one of the most iconic characters as the right-hand man of Star Wars. Right out the gate, you're this girl, and it's certainly a trope nowadays in storytelling and video games especially, where you're playing as an amnesiac character who doesn't remember. It's a great storytelling. It's a trope for a reason. Playing as someone with amnesia means you're learning everything about this character as the character is relearning things about the character. That's why it's such a prominent feature in movies and video games and the like, because it gives you basically a get out of jail free card, where you wouldn't tell somebody, you can tell them exposition to bring the audience up to speed, without it seeming like you're telling this character something of course they already know. If you're playing as an amnesiac, you didn't know, you've forgotten this thing, so you need that exposition kind of delivered to you as well. So it's certainly a well played out trope nowadays, but it was one of the first instances I ever experienced of a story like that. And immediately Terra is introduced, and she's a powerful force from the Empire, but her power is her the control over her from the Empire is broken, and she gets kind of rescued by the Returners and the Alliance and Locke, the famed treasure hunter, roguish thief, but he likes the term treasure hunter. And they kind of they go on a quest, and they meet just one of the richest cast of characters in any game I think I've ever played, which is the story, big story, and what I love about it, before I get into the characters, what I love about the story is that in Final Fantasy VI, the bad guy wins. The world ends. The bad guy wants to destroy the world, and he does. And so the whole first act of the game, the first half of the game, you play in the world of balance. Kefka destroys that world, and you have to pick up the pieces in the world of ruin for the second half of the game. And the audacity of a game to do something like that blew my little 10-year-old mind, or whenever I was playing it. It amazed me that you could tell that kind of story. Like, I'd never seen the bad guys win in that sense. I don't remember if I had seen Star Wars at this point or not, where that fell in the mix of things, but like, it was insane that the bad guys won, destroyed the world, but that wasn't the end. Like, there was still hope in that world, as battered and bruised as it was. And you go through, you recollect your cast, and the idea that there were hidden characters in the game, or that you could complete the game in that world of ruin by not collecting everybody, was not like recollecting your party, or that you could lose party members based on your actions at the end of the World of Balance section. I was very thankful for guides back then, and like strategy guides and things like Nintendo Power, because I would have probably been devastated if I didn't know that if you hung around and waited, Shadow would show up. Because I would not have wanted to leave Shadow on the floating continent to perish in that world. So yeah, it told a story that I had never seen in any medium before, and I still cherish it very much for that. I feel like very few stories have tried to tell that. It's a story told on a grand scale, but filled with intimate moments between your cast of characters. You've got this beautiful, small, blossoming love story between Locke and Celeste. You've got Strago and Realm, the family dynamic, the little one-upsmanship rivalry of the fuddy-duddy grandfather and the child artist, who you can find through secret stories is Shadow's daughter. If you sleep in the inns with Shadow as a member of your party, you'll get like these extra little flashback cutscenes where you see kind of his past and the regrets that he has that led up to him leaving his daughter Realm in the care of Strago. You have the Figaro twin brothers, Edgar and Sabine, who only one of them could be king, and so they left it to a coin toss where Edgar cheated the system with his two-headed coin, and Sabin went off to become his martial artist self. So just filled with rich characters in this world, all of whom get great moments to shine. The ending of the game is probably one of my favorite video game endings ever, because you get a 20 to 30 minute cutscene, effectively, giving each character one last moment to shine throughout this 16-bit cutscene. So that's the first hint I probably ever had of what Square would become in terms of their emphasis and overemphasis these days on the spectacle of telling a story and the images that they can create because of that. Characters, the richness of the characters always has stood out for me in that game. And these are the Final Fantasies back when you could still name all your characters, so I would of course rename all the characters after myself and my friends at the time and family members and whatnot. So I would be playing these roles with all these characters, kind of having them role play as my friends. And so, I'd put myself in as Locke, and I'd put the girl that I had the crush on at the time as Celeste, and let that love story blossom. The Kefka is my favorite villain, easily, of any of the Final Fantasies, because he's effectively the Joker. He is the deranged clown who was basically a science experiment gone awry, the same science experiment that ultimately created Celeste as a Magitech warrior in that game. And this is like, I feel like this is like all incredibly cursory, and like it's one line in there or one extra thing to get that backstory on him, but his brain got fried by Sid doing an experiment years earlier, and it just left him a little off. And so you see him do despicable things like poison entire kingdoms against the wishes and the wishes of other generals in the Empire. He's the madman. He is the clown madman, with the horrifying 16-bit laugh. He again, like he wins, and he rules for a year while you're unconscious in that world of ruin, and while you're recovering, while you're bringing your party back together. So he got everything he ever wanted, and it's you don't see that to that level in video games all that much. And so that was, and I certainly hadn't seen it at that time. It was always like Final Fantasy IV. You had Golbez, who turned out was being kind of manipulated by the thing from the moon, Zemus, I think. Zemus, I don't even remember. That was the other thing. Like, it was a very straightforward. Kefka was crazy and used some magic statues to take over the world. There wasn't creatures from the moon from like Final Fantasy IV. There wasn't aliens like Genova from Final Fantasy VII, or creatures from other dimensions from Final Fantasy IX. All of which are still like those are my 4 favorite Final Fantasies, but the weird steampunk magic aesthetic was one of the most grounded Final Fantasy games, and I think it stands the test of time as a result of that. One of the most amazing elements of it, and I've been listening to a ton of Final Fantasy music this last week. The soundtrack of Final Fantasy VI is probably hands down my favorite of any video game soundtrack ever. Nobuo Uematsu just knocks it out of the park. Every character has their own distinct themes. The opera scene in Final Fantasy VI, where Celeste goes undercover as the opera star Maria to trick Setzer into kidnapping her. Such a like that was probably an iconic moment that I didn't realize at the time set me on the path to do theater. But you see this, you see 10 minutes of an opera, which you're led to believe there is an entire opera probably out there that is Maria and Draco, and the music that undercuts the operetta there, Celeste's theme, is just like I could listen to it, and I would listen to it even in its 16-bit form and get choked up and get emotional. And with what Square has done since with their Distant World series and putting in full orchestrations to a lot of their music, I could listen to that, and I do listen to it and will just cry because of just how beautiful the music flows together. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got something like Kefka's theme, which is just so there's a lot of staccato into it, and I get images of him toying with the Empire as the Puppet Master. I get images of him with his dancing marionettes in that song. You have Locke's theme, which doubles kind of as the Returner's theme, which every time I listen to it just brings a smile to my face, because it just has, it's a great, uplifting, we're going to win kind of tune to it. So yeah, the music is just standout upon standout upon standout theme in that song. Shadow is like it's very simple, and it's kind of whistly, it's very twangy. It's very much like a lone gunman kind of western kind of character for this weird ninja assassin who used to be basically a Bonnie and Clyde type of guy. He was a robber and has lost his partner and has turned to just a life where he is just going to be a lone wolf, and he gets caught up in this party of misfits and vagabonds that is your team in Final Fantasy. So like his theme is just hauntingly beautiful at times. So yeah, just music all across. I encourage anybody to listen to it. There's a song on the Distant Worlds 3 soundtrack that is basically a character theme medley from Final Fantasy VI, and that's what I've been listening to all week this week, just kind of gearing up for this video and to talk about this in particular segment, because it's sublime music, especially for what it was at the time. 16-bit Super Nintendo game, incredible harmonies, incredible. What's great about video game music is the limitations of the systems made it so you pretty much had to focus on the melodies, on very memorable melodies. That's why so many video game themes are so iconic. That's why you have Mario, and that's why you have The Legend of Zelda. That's why you have Tetris as the Final Fantasy theme itself, as these very iconic pieces, because they're almost all melody. But with Super Nintendo, you also got to throw in a little bit of harmony there. So it started getting it got a little bit more complex, but not so overwhelmingly complex that everything became drowned out and the melody got lost. That's why I don't think we have as many iconic soundtracks these days. So much of it is background underscoring music that just doesn't have that catch to it, that hook to it, like these early system games did, like Final Fantasy VI did. So yeah, music stand out in the game. The battle system of the game is one of the it's one of the last ones that I really cherished out of the Final Fantasy series. I love the materia system from Final Fantasy VII, and I love the equipment system from 9, where your gear basically would have spells and stuff attached to it. But the combat system, it's the classic active time battle system that I love, turn-based combat, so you had time to strategize and figure out, okay, I need to take that guy out first, and then I can focus on these guys, and I can have my heavy hitter really get that guy. I can have my magic user get this. It was also one of the last games where it bridged the gap between every character being interchangeable, like in Final Fantasy VII and beyond, where like with the materia system, you could put whatever spell set on any of those characters, and they effectively would be the same person. And the very unique skill sets of something like Final Fantasy IV, where all of your characters were very predetermined and predefined. So you couldn't customize. It was, you've got Edge as your ninja, you've got Cecil as your paladin, you've got Kane as your dragoon, and they're going to learn skills and spells at certain levels, and there's nothing you can do about it. This gave you, every character had their own individuality. So you had Locke, who could steal or mug based on his equipment. You had Strago, who could use the blue magic. He was the blue mage of the game. You had Shadow, again, who was the assassin. You had Cian, who was the samurai with his skilled swords. So everybody had their special, basically. And then the magic system, the Esper system, was where you could kind of give everybody everything if you wanted, and I often did. I would spend hours and hours and hours grinding and getting pretty much all the characters with all of the spells set, so that when I decided to go and take on Kefka in the final battle, I had everyone armed to the gills for those final combats. So yeah, it was a great system where you equip an Esper, and you can use that Esper and do whatever that summon is going to do, whether it's damage the enemy, cure you, give a special status effect, whatever the case may be. And you got the action points, or I think they were action points. I think it was AP. But you got the points at the end of a level in addition to the experience points, and those action points would level up the magic imbued in that Esper and bring it onto your characters at varying levels based on how strong the Esper was, how weak the spell was. So you could get, you can get an Esper, like I think Bismarck later in the game, I think it was, would give you like fire, ice, and lightning at or thunder back then at like 20 times. So you only need 5 action points to get to 100%, and so you could usually crank that out in a battle or two, and you would have fire, ice, and thunder on that character. So I loved kind of every character still feels like they're important and has their own skill set, but you can also beef them all up with the same kinds of skills. You didn't have just a mage character anymore. You had Edgar, the mechanist, who could use his tools and could use the Ultima spell if you wanted, or you could have Sabin and his blitz martial artist power and him being your healer if you wanted. So it was a great mix of kind of the old school and what would become kind of the standard operating procedure of, well, every character can do everything if you put in enough time. So yeah, those were that's pretty much why I love Final Fantasy VI. I think the art style, because it's still a sprite-based game from that era, I think it holds up in this day and age, whereas other Final Fantasies like 7, 8, 9, and so on, with their the shift to 3D, you lose something on. They're harder to go back to, whereas this the 2-bit style might be a little slower than modern gaming and than we're used to, but it doesn't, to me at least, it doesn't look bad. It's great. There's a great story there, great characters, great music, an endlessly replayable game in my mind. I could talk about it for hours and hours, because yeah, it's just there's just fun little secrets throughout that game, fun little just moments, great moments, like the character of Gogo, one of the completely optional characters that you can only find in the World of Ruin. I love the hints that that character may or may not be Setzer's friend Daryl, who you get her airship in in the world of Ruin. That's how you end up getting around the world, because she lost it, or she, like, they raced around the world, and she disappeared, and all he found was like the wrecked craft, and repaired it and hid it away. But you get just the slightest little hints that she could be, that Go-Go could be Daryl, and Go-Go a mimic. I didn't discover until I probably had the game for years, that you could customize you could basically give Go-Go any of the other people's skills. You could have Go-Go have the tools of Edgar. You could have Go-Go have the blitz of Sabin. You could have Go-Go steal, and you could have Go-Go use magic. You could set those in the customization menu, and I just, like, it when I discovered that, I was like, oh my god, how have I not known this before? This is amazing. This is a game changer for using that character. So yeah, like little things like that made that game endlessly fun for me. I go back to it every few years when I can. I have it on pretty much every system it's ever been released on, with the exception being like mobile. I haven't purchased. I have not spent the $15 that Square continues to want to put it on my Android. I also don't like the redesign they did of the sprite characters for the chibi redesign. I'm a purist in the original sense. They're not ugly, and they get a lot more hate than they probably deserve, but I didn't see any reason to make the change, so I can do without it. But yeah, I have it on like PlayStation. I think the Game Boy Advance version is probably the definitive one to play if you get the chance. As the cartridge-based version of the game, it doesn't have the weird little loading hiccups that like the PlayStation 1 version of the game, which you can also get as the PSN Classic on like PlayStation 3 or the Vita or the PSP, because those are all emulations of the optical disc, the CD version of the game. Pretty much every time you go into a battle or go into a new screen, there's like just a extra little hiccup or two of loading that you didn't get with cartridge media. So you didn't get that with the Super Nintendo, and you don't get it with the Game Boy Advance version. Plus, they added in a handful of extra little features in the Game Boy Advance version. So and extra dungeons, extra espers. And it's just a great on-the-go game. All around, yeah. I think I can leave it there. I think I'm comfortable leaving it there. Final Fantasy VI, my favorite game of all time. A game that helped get me to where I am, because it got me interested in so many, in the bigger world that video games can be. It taught me how grandiose stories video games can tell. It taught me how great video game music can be and create. And yeah, it got me into theater in some subliminal way. Segway, Trevor way, Trove way. Yeah, there's not really a good transition there.